Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure and an honour to be here. Thank you so much to World Human Forum for inviting me, and it's been incredible to meet so many of you over the last couple of days. I look forward to more conversations. I will say a quick word about why I'm on this excellent panel of experts as a non-academic taking up this space. So my role at Oxford University is I'm the executive producer for the new Schwarzman Centre Cultural Programme. As we are thinking on this panel about Earth ecological settlements, I'll say a little bit about the new Schwarzman Centre for Humanities at Oxford. This is a building that is not yet open, but will open very soon at the end of this year and into next year. It's the largest building Oxford University has ever built. 25,000 square metres with 1,000 rooms inside. The building has been designed to honour Oxford's traditional beauty, but to be a space for future thinking, for coming together. And the ambition is that it will be a global beacon to champion the role of arts and humanities in tackling some of the global challenges we face. The building asks, what does it mean to be human in a complex world? And so it addresses lots of the things we're talking about over these 2 days. The building has been designed, many of you may know Oxford, many of Oxford University's buildings and spaces have not been designed to be open to the public. This building has been designed specifically to be completely open to the public. All public. We want the building to be a place where everybody feels that they can belong, where people can come and meet with academics, with students, with artists, creatives, with each other, to think and reflect upon humanity. The building will also house the new Institute for Ethics in AI that sits within the philosophy faculty. So a space for also considering how do we tackle AI in our humanity as we move forwards. And so the other part of the building that is my area is a new cultural programme. So the cultural programme is designed to bring together world-leading artists, world-leading academics and communities to create incredible, ambitious cultural projects that reach broad and diverse audiences and participants. It's a new venture for the university and as a producer, I believe that the role of arts and creativity is vital to tackling any of these challenges that we face, and of course bringing hope and joy and beauty into our lives. So that is a little context for why I am here chairing this panel. So the panel here brings together leading architectural thinkers and historians, and we're going to explore ecological living. The discussions that we have will draw on the new European Bauhaus values of beautiful, sustainable, and together. So the way we inhabit the earth needs to be reimagined, and so together we'll explore how we might draw from the past and the present to envision the ecological settlements of the future on Earth. Thank you. Okay. So, how this is going to work is each of the panelists, I'll introduce them and they'll say a little bit about what they do and the themes of the conversation. And then we only have an hour, so I'm going to be a strict timekeeper. We will open up the conversation between the panelists and see what comes out of it. Okay, first up, I'd like to introduce David Gissen, who is the Professor of Architecture and Director of the PhD programme at Yale University School of Architecture. Thank you, David.
First, thank you so much for having me here. This is the most stunning view I think I've ever had from a conference that I've spoken in. So I very much appreciate the setting and the effort that it took to bring us all here. So I was asked to talk about disability, both in the past and the future. And the first thing I want to say is that many modernist and modern, and particularly modern architects' visions of a beautiful future is one in which disability has been completely eliminated from cities and from society. And I would argue that disability is in fact something that we need to figure out how to preserve into the future because of the vantage points it gives us, not just on being human beings, but on certain aspects that are intrinsic to life. And I want to begin by actually talking about some historical episodes by going back 77 million years ago. So recently, paleontologists have discovered that dinosaurs had all kinds of impairments that are very familiar to us from looking at their fossils. Many dinosaurs had arthritis. They had respiratory ailments that are very similar to tuberculosis. And in fact, recently, a group of scientists studying dinosaur bones in Canada have discovered that a dinosaur had the exact same bone cancer that I had when I was 16 years old. So this is a 77 million year old disease. In addition to that, many of our human ancestors, or our human cousins, I should say, also had impairments that are imprinted into the fossil record. So recently, paleontologists have discovered that Neanderthals had Down syndrome, that caves were sites, ancient Neanderthal caves were sites where bones were set. There's evidence of this. And that, in fact, recently in studying the bones from a cave site in Iraq, in Kanidar, it was discovered that this particular individual from over 100,000 years ago spent almost his entire life paralyzed. And so paleontologists will argue that the fact that these disabled people lived in these caves shows that ancient Neanderthals cared for others. Well, I would make one serious criticism of that. That denies the agency of these people with disabilities. This is someone who lived 40 years with paralysis. So there's another Japanese thinker or a theorist of disability named Yokozuka Koichi, who argues that impairment is the root of human settlement. And so by looking at examples of these Neanderthal bones, of ancient imagery in Japanese culture, he argues that the people that were immobilized were the people that needed to settle. And he even goes so far as to say that it was people with impairments that must have tended fire and created fires in these communities. It was a central role. So just to bring this up a little closer to 2,000 years ago, to a site that many of you know, a place like the Acropolis is also one where we can recover a very important disability history. So for example, many of you have been to the Acropolis, maybe all of you have been to the Acropolis. Today you walk up a very steep and winding path that was designed by Dimitri Pikionis. It's something that was designed in the 1950s that was very celebrated. And today, as many of you know, especially those of you who live in Greece, there's a lot of controversies around trying to make the Acropolis more accessible by including elevators and ramps and so forth. But 2,500 years ago, the Acropolis was actually reached via a series of cascading ramps. And many of you may know the name of Manolis Korres, was really one of the first to offer reconstructions of what these ramps might have been like. And actually with Mantha Zarmakoupi here and Jen Steger and myself, we were involved with a project called An Archaeology of Disability to try to reconstruct the ramp among many other elements and evidence of impairment at the Acropolis site. So for example, the Pan-Athenaic frieze shows people walking with canes, an individual with crutches, veterans of war, elderly people, children, pregnant women. So not that the Pan-Athenaic frieze at the Acropolis is a photograph, but we do believe this was a site of disability culture, broadly defined. So let's think about the future, and I'll conclude with the future. Outer space and traveling to outer space is imagined as being one of the most physically demanding activities that a human being can do, and one can watch many films in the US or read books about the kinds of tests that astronauts are put through to be able to prove that they're up to the challenge of going to space. But the experience of being in outer space, the experience of being on artificial respiration, the experience of using hearing aids and speaking aids, the experience of using assistants to go to the bathroom, the experience of weightlessness, these are all experiences and technologies that were originally designed for, with, and by people with disabilities in the 20th century. So space involves the implementation of technologies that are very familiar to people who are disabled down on Earth here. And in fact, 5 years ago, NASA undertook a study, I'm almost finished, where they took people who were paraplegics, people who did not have use of their legs but use of their arms, and put them in a completely weightless environment in an airplane that descended very quickly. And they discovered they had more physical capacities than astronauts because the experience of not using their legs was completely familiar to them. Similarly, my friend Georgina Klieg, who has a wonderful job description, she's a blind art theorist. And so whenever she boards a plane or a train, she tells me, not every time, but often a attendant will come over and say, if there's an emergency, the power goes out, someone will come to assist you. And she says, I'm blind. if the power goes out, I'm the only person who can lead everybody out of the plane or the train in a disaster. It will not faze me at all. And so she says, you should come to me and I'll help everybody else. So I want to end with a provocation and say, yes, maybe space actually is, or if space is the place where the most capacitated of us belong, maybe that is true. Maybe the most capacitated people on Earth should go and live in outer space forever, briefly, and leave us who are disabled down here on Earth. And I promise you, when you come back, it'll be a much more interesting place.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David. Next up, we have Catherine Gall, who's the Executive Director of the Sorbonne-based research lab Share ETI. Catherine.
Thank you, Josie. Well, it's quite amazing to be here. I'm a passionate and a fan of Greek and the Greek culture. And the point we want to make about the future is that in our research, I work in a team that's a multidisciplinary team that is really dedicated to imagining the future of cities, but not from technology, from actually the point that wouldn't it be nice if we could live in happy cities, in caring cities, in affordable cities, in cities where actually we go back and we think of the human beings. Because as I see behind you, and it's my first time on this sacred island, so I'm discovering those remainings, those elements of the past, and I can start imagining what was going on. I can figure out, and might not be totally true, but I can start understanding what was going on, the activities and the size and the number of people. I wonder what the people or whoever comes after us in a couple of 100 years would think if they were to see the remainings of our cities these days. And if they saw the size of the streets, the infrastructures, the buildings, they might think, well, what kind of species was living here? Were they human or were they a sort of hybrid mutants? And Carlos, I'm going to steal this from you, so you can't use it later on today. But I think they might think that it was occupied by mutants who were half cars, half human. Because when you see the size of this infrastructure, and it's not a fight against infrastructure, it's just a reflection on the fact that we first designed cities and villages and small settlements to protect each other, to be around, to be, as we see those walls and those elements, to be together, to trade, to teach, to sell, to grow vegetable, to educate, to work with artists and be entertained and all of that. And of course, we were more people. More people came in and we invented wheels and we invented many things. And I think we lost, and I'm not thinking myself, but we think we've lost a bit the point that now we are creating more infrastructure for the other part of the things that are in cities and not so much the human beings. And if you think of also the human side, it's not just a generic person, it's children. It's also the animals we have with us. It's people who are young and fit and also older and with disabilities. And we are making it very difficult for them to live a happy life and to be happy citizens. And a lot of the things we experience and we hear from the world today is probably because of that, because of the density, because of the stress, because we've created distances to go to work, to go to a school, to actually access supply and vegetable because they don't grow around. So all of this distance thing, it's what we look at from a proximity standpoint. So the theme of our research is around proximity. You may have heard the model of the 15-minute city, but the number of minutes is really not important. What's important is that for most of us, distance is just a factor. We can decide which transportation, mobility, vehicle we use. For many people, it's not the case. For many people, they only have a choice for public transportation and they have to organize their life around that. For some, there are no options. So we've dedicated this research around thinking that we should start designing cities and thinking that we want to make happy citizens. We want to also be in that togetherness. In fact, you're reminding us as well about the fact that Margaret Mead was here some time ago, and she actually talks about civilization starting when you start healing that bone that was broken. And so cities without people wouldn't be cities. They would be wasted land. So this is the research we do. We are testing it with many different cities and collectives, and we cannot agree more with Alexandra about the fact that it's a bottom-up and a top-down approach. We all have a role. We cannot simply complain to urban designers or engineers or mayors or whoever about the things that don't work, because every day we make a decision. We make a decision to walk our children to school or to take another means of transportation. Every day we make the decision to buy local food or to buy from a supermarket that's further out, that has logistical chain and so on. So let's just reflect about that. This is the model we are studying. We are able to experiment at neighborhood, at street level, because we are going to change the world, but step by step, street by street, block by block. This is the work we do. We're very lucky because thanks to Professor Moreno, who's speaking later on, we've been able to work with the city of Paris. And I want to close this by saying that one thing we have done, I think makes sense, is, for example, to change the urban planning in Paris and create streets that are for kids. Streets that go to school, and if you start showing your children, because they can walk to school, they can cycle to school, they can take an active mobility transfer, that they have a place in the city, that they are not, in danger, they shouldn't be afraid, then the next generation will also like to walk and see and maybe take a slower pace, not that just walking from one stop to another to do something, get some things done, because cities are also places for contemplation and for wandering. So this is our message. We are very happy to be working on this, and hopefully we can talk some more over the next day. Thanks you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Catherine, you weren't here yesterday, but there was a provocation in the session yesterday of what if cities were designed for 0 to 3-year-olds. And so it's interesting hearing you talk about children in the picture of thinking of cities. So maybe we'll come back to that a bit later. Okay. So I'd now like to introduce Daniel Barber. Daniel is Professor of Architecture and Research Chair of History and Decarbonisation at the Technical University of Eindhoven.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Such an amazing pleasure to be here. I hope everybody's sort of feeling comfortable enough here in the hot sun. We get this little bit of breeze, right, coming off of the beach. We've been hearing these amazing talks yesterday and today, and I'm beginning to think that we might be beginning to formulate a bit of a new Delos declaration, right? And so what I would declare in such a context is 3 simple words about the future of human settlements, right? And you can say them with me if you know the song. Make yourself uncomfortable, right? Now, what could I possibly mean about such a ridiculous suggestion? I'm talking about thermal comfort in particular, right? The way that we feel inside, the heat and humidity, the relative temperature and humidity that affects our lives in our interiors, right? Now, when I walked into Utopia, yeah, and for those of you who are just joining us here, that's the name of our hotel, right? I'm not that delusional. When I walked into Utopia, the first thing I did was turn off the air conditioner, right? It's a nice little room. The door is easy to open. In fact, you have to kind of open the door to the hallway to get a little cross ventilation, right? But we recognize in that act, yeah, a kind of expectation either from ourselves or those designing, managing the hotel. There's an assumption, that the AC will always be on, right? I mean, part of our relationship to thermal comfort is it's always there. Right? You can go back to it. We're not experiencing it maybe now, where we have a different sort of thermal pleasure, of course, but you can always go back to a space. We know that this space will be there, almost preserved, right, ready for us to inhabit. So these always-on systems, and again, forgive me if I'm repeating some obvious facts here, hugely reliant upon fossil fuels, right? We can begin to even sort of map a causal chain from that switch turning on the air conditioning, right, to the refining plants that are also running all the time, the coal-powered or other sorts of power plants that are sort of keeping us hot or cold, back to the extraction sites, the labor of extraction, the violence of extraction, the global regimes that we participate in. So on the one hand, we're kind of in, that's one kind of aspect of this comfort, right? It's how do we resist that always on? The other is to recognize, again, in our beautiful hotel room, I should say, that our buildings are not fit to purpose, right? When I turn off the AC, if I open the door, if it's a little bit in the evening, and the mosquitoes come in, right? I mean, we could easily imagine a kind of intervention, again, where you kind of increase some of the passive ventilation, put a mesh screen. But the buildings that we live in much more extremely, of course, in, say, a sealed office tower, right? Where, in fact, you can't even go inside in many cases without the HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, churning away, right? So buildings are not fit to purpose for this climate-changed future. Furthermore, it's not only us, right, but it's our buildings themselves, right? If we were to not condition to dehumidify, to keep a regular temperature in a lot of the buildings as we build them today, the walls would begin to mold, the floors would begin to warp, right? The beautiful decorations would begin to sag and wilt, right? We would have a completely changed environment in the interior. So we found ourselves in a condition where we completely rely on these HVAC systems in order to maintain the way that we live, right? And when I'm saying we, I want to just sort of take a moment to be a little precise about that, right? I mean, I'm talking about thermal comfort and making yourself uncomfortable amongst this crowd. If I can make a possibly outlandish assumption, I'll suggest that we have all benefited from a century of carbonization, right? Many others have suffered. And as we manage today, as we kind of reimagine the ways that we think about the climate crisis, it's really a crisis of equity, right? Which is to say we could stay in our sealed homes and sealed towers and beautiful hotel rooms, continuing to churn away, burn fossil fuels, not only producing carbon emissions, also the waste heat that goes into our cities and makes those who are more vulnerable living in much more difficult lives, right? So the climate crisis is really about a crisis of equity and how we widen that circle, right? And imagine a kind of redistribution of comfort. Do I have a few more minutes? Okay, so maybe you're thinking, okay, all well and good, late May, living in utopia, not that hot, not that cold, this nice breeze. Of course we can turn off the AC, right? It's easy to be uncomfortable. Some of you might be thinking, well, but have you been in Athens in the middle of July when it's 45 degrees? In fact, I have. I turned on the air conditioner, right? And this is kind of part of the point. Turn it off now when you don't really need it. Need, desire, these are important issues to contest. When you don't really need it, right? Because you might need it later, right? Minimize when you can, optimize when you're able. Or you may be thinking, as Thomas and I were talking quite briefly about yesterday, all well and good for those of us with the resources and privilege to fly around the world and appear in this amazing site in Delos. What about those for whom air conditioning is quite literally a question of life and death? Right? And those might be people far away, regions we might not be visiting as frequently. They might be people down the street, people in hospitals, people in other places. Of course, I'm not suggesting that everyone should suffer, but rather those of us who have, again, benefited from this century of carbonization, sort of imagine a kind of thermal transfer, right? From our lives and the kind of daily running and consistency that we've become accustomed to, rather those in power, if I dare say, to those in need, right? And of course, we can think about that not only in terms of hospitals and spaces where dehumidification in particular allows for a good night's sleep over a hot summer, right? Maintaining health, maintaining well-being. We can also think about museums, archives, other places that we value in our society. So again, the point is really about this question of we, yeah, and how we kind of reimagine our relationship to comfort. Okay, one other point you might be thinking, I'm not sure if anybody's thinking any of these things actually, of course, but you might be thinking it's just a tiny little hotel room, right? What's the big deal? I turn off the air conditioner, I turn on the conditioner, it doesn't really matter, right? And this is an important point that was made by Timothy Morton a few years ago in a great book called The Ecological Thought, right? And the ecological thought is the one by which everything I do matters, right? If I ride my bike instead of drive my car, if I turn it off or turn it on, the air conditioner, right, that matters completely at the same time that it doesn't matter at all. It's just one little piece, right? One little piece in this huge puzzle. So we have to kind of hold that within us, right? It both matters and doesn't matter at the same time. But we, of course, have the capacity to think abstractly. We can perhaps think of this tiny little room, this tiny hotel room, as part of what I like to think of as the planetary interior, right? We can imagine millions of these tiny little hotel rooms around the world. We can imagine, what if we all, and I'm not kind of going to be checking up on you, right? But what if we all went back to our hotel room tonight and turned off the air conditioner? The hotel would notice. Maybe they would imagine that they could reimagine their own way of relating to these infrastructures, right, and these systems of comfort. I'm not too optimistic, but as they're building another version of the hotel down towards the beach, maybe they take the air conditioners out and allow for some passive ventilation right there near the coast, right? So pushing back against all of these questions, right, that might encourage us to say, it's not that big of a deal, it's just an evening in a hotel, right? But rather, how do we sort of push ourselves or imagine ourselves to be living in these spaces of discomfort? So one more thing I want to note, right, is I'm not suggesting that the future of discomfort, which is coming, right? I mean, it's either coming because we design according to it or because we don't, and therefore sort of by default, yeah? through the expansion of climate inequities around the world. But to put it in a slightly different light, right? What we recognize is that this century of fossil fuels has been really quite well bracketed. Yeah, 1925, 2025. Let's be optimistic. Yeah, a century of fossil fuels that is now in the past. And what we notice as architectural historians and other sorts of historians is if we sort of skip over that bracket to a period before air conditioning, and of course there's many customary practices that have also continued through that period, we find a huge wealth of tools, of skills, of design practices, materials, ways of living, ways of thinking, ways of occupying spaces that don't require or at least reduce our reliance upon mechanical systems, right? So it's to say that the project of architecture today, in my mind, is really about this sort of agency around decarbonization, right? How do we reimagine our field? How do we reimagine the ways that we produce buildings, the ways that we live in buildings, to reimagine our relationship to comfort, and through that relationship to comfort, the capacity, the possibility for a different kind of future. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. I kind of love the Delos Declaration challenge there. Yeah, you can take that forward. So I would now like to welcome Beatriz Colomina, the Howard Crosby Butler Professor of the History of Architecture at Princeton University School of Architecture.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here in this magical place, in this mythical place of Delos, where already yesterday we were walking around with Alessandra, and where I felt this incredible strength of these rocks around here and this fantastic connection to this land, right? I'd like to talk about something else, which is a crisis that humanity is confronting right now, that in the thoughts of some scientists is a bigger crisis than climate change, in the sense that it will get to us even earlier, which is the crisis of microbial diversity. Right? You have heard about the microbiome and how the paradigm of health of our time is all related to the trillions of microbes that inhabit us, that feed us, that has everything to do with our health, but also with our mental health. And it turns out that all the diseases of our time, all the diseases that a generation before were not even here, all these autoimmune disorders, all these allergies. When I went to school, there was not even a single kid in my school that was allergic to peanuts or anything like that. This is completely new. But also many forms of cancer, obesity, Alzheimer's, autism, many, I would say almost all, they say, all of the diseases of our times have to do with the reduction of the microbial diversity in our guts. And this is a major catastrophe. This is a major crisis. And we know already to pay attention to this in terms of general culture. There is articles in the in the newspapers all the time about how the microbiome and how you should take probiotics and drink kombucha. And I think at a general level we all understand that. What we don't understand is how much architecture has been implicated in this reduction of microbial diversity. It has to do a lot with this separation from the soil, right? With the soil is life. The majority of the greatest concentration of microbes is precisely in the soil. And the biggest concentration in the human body is in the gut. And there's this connection between the gut and the soil that we need to reestablish. That is, we need to arrive to another paradigm of architecture in which we are more connected. To architecture for the longest time had been antibiotic totally modern architecture is an antibiotic. Before penicillin was invented, architecture established a number of protocols to actually combat what was a major catastrophe of the time, which was all the bacterial diseases, particularly tuberculosis. So what we now understand as modern architecture was actually born in the sanatoria. That is, white buildings, terraces for the cure, ventilation, open windows, all these things, which were very good. They were developed before penicillin, and they acted actually as an antibiotic. They were a cure for all the bacterial diseases. But like with penicillin, we overdid it. We created our own monsters. And when architecture, as Daniel was saying before, became too hermetic, the more hermetic it became, the more we created these Stremophiles. Stremophiles are bacteria that has resisted all the cleaning protocols that we normally impose on our houses and our hospitals, etc. And these are extremely dangerous. Those are the ones that you encounter in a hospital when you go to a routine operation like a knee replacement and end up with a infection that you pick up from the walls in the hospital and is untreatable, right? And you die. And this is predicted to increase so brutally that it's a major threat to us. In Italy, they are doing an experiment. Since COVID, they have done an experiment in a number of hospitals in which instead of doing this radical cleaning of the walls, they spray them with good microbe, right? And it turns out that people get better, they stay less in the hospital, and they don't develop this antibacterial resistance. So this is extremely important, how architecture has been involved in this decline of the microbial diversity. I'll give you an example from one of our collaborators, a scientist from Rutgers University, who cracked a problem that nobody understood, why babies born out of cesarean instead of passing by the beneficial bacteria in the vagina, a year after they are born, they can have incomprehensible problems. Well, it turned out, and she demonstrated that a year after they are born, these babies had microbes in their bodies that were in the walls of the presumably aseptic room in which the operation took place. So sometimes, of course, they have these terrible problems, and where it is passed by the beneficial bacteria of the mother's vagina, they don't have that problem. They are trying to combat that problem by wiping the vagina, the bacteria into the baby's body, but it's not enough. It's not enough because we are losing enormous diversity of bacteria. And this team of scientists have been going around the world and collecting microbes from all kinds of rural communities, communities in the Amazon. Indigenous communities has the richest microbiome in the world, no surprise. And they have established a bank in Switzerland, very much inspired by the seed bank in Norway, because it's becoming a problem that we are losing so much bacteria, and we don't really know what this bacteria is useful for yet, but they are being preserved in a vault in Switzerland for further use in the future, because it will be very soon that we will have to, and it's already happening in the treatment of some intractable diseases, that we eat fecal, that we have fecal implants, right? That we will eat precisely fecal implants from healthier people from other parts of the world in order to survive. So this is, I think, an important issue for architecture. Architecture, of course, always presents itself as being human-centered, but this human that is always at the center of human-centered design is a very suspect guy. You probably know him very well. He's the man of Leonardo, this athletic, white, beautiful man, or the man of Le Corbusier, this macho man. So at the center of architecture for several centuries, we have this athletic, able, white body that, of course, excludes most of the humanity, and we call that human-centered design. And I'm very inspired by what David said, too, because, of course, this is a fiction that is unbelievable that we have sustained it for so long in architecture, because to start with, excludes half of the humanity. All women are out, right? But then all people that are not white, and also if you happen to be white and athletic and beautiful and so strong, okay, how long does this last? Right? Because we are born very fragile and we die very fragile, and in the meantime we break a leg or we get cancer or we we are pregnant, or we go through a lot of things. So the majority of the time the human is a very, very fragile creature that needs to be kind of kept at an inside temperature of more or less 36 to 37 degrees Fahrenheit. We are incredibly fragile, and architecture is this cocoon, this artificial skin for this very, very fragile creature, right? And in this moment, this fragility is precisely this disconnection from the soil that is producing all the diseases of our time. The more your house is super clean with all these antiseptics and all these things, the more your kid is having allergies and autoimmune disorders, just to say one. So I'm calling from an architecture that is somehow more centered on bacteria rather than in so-called human, that is not that human, but it's a privileged human that we don't want to know so much about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Beatriz. So we've heard a lot about some of the challenges and maybe some opportunities for thinking about future settlements, future cities. As a mother of 3 young children, I'm kind of enjoying the fact that I can feel less guilty about the house being filthy and dirty and the children being mucky and, occupying their space. I wonder if we could take a minute to think about how we could design our future cities or settlements in a way that fosters health, care, equity and solidarity, and what might collective living look like in those spaces. So we've heard a lot about the opportunities, and I wonder if you could now describe for us, imagine a part of a city in the way that you would love to see it in the future. And Mantha, please feel free to join in as well.
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah. I'm very interested in what Catherine said, and I don't know if this is a familiar term, but oftentimes neighborhoods in cities or in the suburbs are measured by their walkability rating. Have you ever heard this term? The walkability rating, which is very much related to the 15-minute city. And one of my experiences as somebody who's experienced a lot of immobility, and just like everyone here is somebody who's experienced life under COVID and isolation, I wonder if you could give a neighborhood an immobility rating. Like, what is the experience of your apartment or your home when you're inside and you can't move and you're forced for physical reasons or whatever to remain still and immobilized? What is the experience? I live in Greenwich Village, which is one of the best places to be immobilized, I think, in the world. It's a neighborhood that Jane Jacobs, very famous urbanist, argued was one of the most walkable, but it's also one of the most, what would be the beautiful adjective for immobility. It's a wonderful place to be disabled, to be still, to be in a chair. It's a very lively place in which one can experience a lot of the world without actually having to always ambulate through it. So I would recommend that as a future experience we might design or imagine. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David.
Very, very disciplined. I follow the second time. So building on this, of course, on our side, we are very interested in also thinking of the city as a living organism, day and night and evenings and working days and weekends, because we've created cities that have business districts that only operate from the work days that are usually quite dead or uninteresting at night. Other parts of the cities are more the nightlife places, and the reality is that togetherness starts with together, and together means we share. We share the city. It's not as much as I love the city I'm in, I share it with others. There are things that I like to use myself, but I also go there because I want to find what I was not looking for. So this serendipity, it's the sense of surprise, the choices from Jane Jacobs. So let's think of the city as a place and a time that works, in a balanced way. So we still want to have people people sleeping during the night and not having all the nightclubs around and so on. But still, the pulse of the city is also that. And when you read the guidebooks of where to go, to do what, and so on, it's always nice to have those types of things. And again, I think we usually, architects and urban planners, don't always think of nightlife in cities, and so that's why it's really a blank field. We have so much to do in there, thinking of the people who work at nights. What do you do during the rest of the day, and where do you go when you work nights? And you are only confined with your community then. So that's my thought. And just one thing, don't want to scare anyone, but the rate of loneliness is higher and higher in cities. So you can be very alone in a very large city. So what do we do for that? And lots of research is going to solve this issue, and there are lonely people who are very young and totally connected to their digital technology and who don't know how to build a relationship and are remote from any sort of community. But you also have elderly people who actually, don't have the community, supporting community. We've experienced this through COVID. And so our research has really gone much more exposed after COVID, because this idea of, a caring community, do I know my neighbor from above, from downstairs, from next door, and can I do something to actually be part of that same space and time? So that's for that.
Thank you. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, two quick things, right? I mean, I think this question around the future city and really this question of togetherness and collectivity, we're sort of evidence of it here. We can sort of manage discomfort much better when we're together. Right? I mean, when you're in a space of community and we're all kind of happy to be here. I wouldn't say despite the sun, because it's really not that bad, right? But, we are able to sort of work together, and even if you're, if you're cold in the winter and you huddle closer, right? I mean, there's social means to sort of mitigate some of these challenges. But the other thing I'd say, which is a little bit of a different story, the kind of city of the future, the city of the present, the crisis we face is that of the need to resist demolition, right? I mean, to really work with our existing building stock and sort of build as little as possible, while also trying to understand or better engage the dynamics of the runaway housing affordability crisis that is experienced in almost every part of the world at this stage, right? And so how we sort of balance the kind of need to dramatically reduce our carbon load, right? And many of you may know, when you demolish a building, you sort of release the carbon that's embodied in it, and then of course you put all this new stuff there, and it's just energy and emissions and emissions. And so there's a lot of great work going on today in the field to really focus architects on reuse, on retrofit, on reimagining existing building stock. And that's really about communities, right? Because people either live in those buildings or they relate to those buildings, they understand, those buildings are part of their urban environment. And so it's really about how we kind of respect the communal environments that are existing, but again, decarbonize them, right? Aggressively and urgently, but with respect for the communities that are living in these places.
Yes, and another very important issue that is coming up is that, we keep thinking about cities as if we are going to continue to grow exponentially or super exponentially, as we have been doing since the Industrial Revolution. But what very few people seem to realize, at least in the world of architecture, is that we are not really thinking about it, but it's actually happening, and all the economists have already predicted it, and we have read it in the New York Times, and we have read it in the Financial Times, etc., is that we are very, very close to get to the top of this growth. So we are now at 8 billion. They say that we were going to get to 10 billions by 1085, and then we will come down, but then the predictions keep being rearranged, and now they say it's 1060, and now they keep saying that maybe it's even earlier. Why? Because the fertility rate is coming down so fast, right? And this is our adjustments that we are making. I mean, women are making, very intelligent women will save the earth. But the question is that precisely because the rate of birth is coming down so dramatically in all parts of the world, including Latin America, dramatically in Latin America, I will say in Africa, in of course Europe and the United States and Japan for a long time, etc. It's predicted now that in a generation, perhaps in less than a generation, we will see declining, and it will decline so steeply that we will not really have time to adapt, because we are going to see empty cities and collapsed economies and all kinds of disasters. And you probably have read that in the New York Times. So how come that as architects, as an architecture community, are we not thinking about this? That is not anymore about growth, that we have to start thinking that we are about to reach the limit precisely, and that we have to start anticipating what is it that we can do to make this unbelievable decline that is coming. We are going to descend, according to all the scientists, all the experts on population, to medieval times in terms of population. Okay, so shouldn't we start thinking about this now? Because if this is 2060, that's tomorrow, right? And it may come even earlier than that. And in that sense, I mean, Mark and I were involved in an exhibition in the current Venice Biennale with a number of scientists and microbiologists from Harvard and a physicist from Santa Fe, Jeffrey West, a very famous physicist on this question of population growth, and with the great designer Patricia Urquiola. And we also created precisely this installation that provides a scenario that is much less dramatic than what these economists are predicting. And it's based on the idea precisely of learning from bacteria, because bacteria are experts in exponential growth. They could cover the Earth in 44 hours. One single bacteria replicating itself could cover the Earth in 44 hours, but they are much smarter than us humans. They don't do that, because then there's the end of everything, right? So it's very beautiful that bacteria, when they sense the scarcity of resources, is when they produce these very beautiful patterns that you have seen that look like cities. So exactly the opposite of humans, that when they sense the immensity of resources, then is when we build big skyscrapers and so on. So no, they do the opposite. When they sense the scarcity, then is when they build these beautiful things that are working so efficiently. So maybe we could learn from bacteria to be more intelligent about our future cities.
Thank you so much. I like that. This is to add to our declaration. We're going to learn from bacteria. I like it. Mantha.
So yeah, I mean, I think this panel, in fact, shows how much, architects and thinkers, architectural thinkers are, reaching out to other disciplines to think about the future of settlements. And it's something that collectively, as you're saying, we need to do together, not to sit in the disciplinary trenches where we are like, our knowledge sits, but then reach out in other disciplines, something that, for instance, Doxiadis in the 60s and 70s this year with the Delos Symposia, something that I think these meetings now are trying to bring people together from distinct disciplines, from the academy, from policy making and so on, to generate discussion and bring us together to think about the future. And also the lesson from the past, that we tend to think of these questions are pressing of the moment, but they have a historical depth. Revisiting that history, Mark yesterday was pointing out to the short period when we're thinking about the history of Earth, of human settlements. And when we see that in the longue durée, then we have a perspective. And, visiting history together across disciplines is the solution. Something that Doxiadis did in the 60s and 70s, something that these meetings are attempting to do as well. I think this is my answer.
Thank you so much. We have maybe 5 minutes left, and because they made me chair, I have a question that relates to my world. So as a creative and arts producer, I would like to ask the panel, what is the role of the arts or arts and culture in imagining and developing new cities? But we only have 5 minutes, so quick fire round.
I think it's great. I mean, I think precisely we should use every platform, right? For example, I was talking about the Venice Biennale and the beautiful collaboration with the architect Patricia Urquiola, and with these scientists and architectural historians collaboration to produce an exhibition that communicates to the wider public. That's one of the ways in which we can provide scenarios, not solutions, because it's impossible, scenarios in which we could start thinking about cities different. The same thing with the Triennale de Milano, where we just opened it's a big exhibition in the Triennale de Milano on a very important theme of our times, which is inequalities. And we address precisely the question of inequalities from the point of view of health and the microbial lack of microbial, diminishing microbial diversity that I was just talking about. That was another fantastic opportunity that just opened the exhibition in Milano in May, in middle of May, so 2 weeks ago. It's the same, collaborating with artists, with architects, with designers, with visual graphic designers, with people that are able to visualize data, in communicating to the wider public, because the Triennale for the first time will be free of charge. So everybody in Milan, everybody could go for free. And that opens the discussion of what is architecture in this very, very difficult time. And what could it be, right? Open a conversation.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's about bringing emotions, because cities are not just technical object. They are places where we have emotions. We love cities, we hate cities, we feel. We talked about thermal comfort. I didn't use AC, by the way, in the hotel. And for children, for example, you can ask them to imagine a city, and if you tell them imagine a happy city, they are going to draw something. They are going to draw animals. They are going to draw light and skies and stuff like that. And adults can do this as well, but we are limiting ourselves. We have put down the emotional layer around art, and so when you open that up, then you can co-create cities, and you can open that dialogue and also involve and make things more visible that would never be described by words.
Yeah, I'll just sort of reflect some of what both of my brilliant colleagues have said. I also had an amazing opportunity to develop a project for the Venice Biennale open right now. We are calling it Terms and Conditions, in which we've used the waste heat of air conditioners to fill up the first room of the Arsenale and produce a very uncomfortable space, right? And then you sort of walk through into the cool side of, usually the cool side is on the inside, but we've put the hot side on the inside, and you sort of go through the final portal and then experience the cool and walk out into the rest of the exhibition, right? As sort of a recognition, sort of an understanding that, all of our innovations come at a cost, right? And we need to be constantly negotiating these questions of technology and in effect, the value of marginalized lives. So, that's one piece, but I think also Amitav Ghosh, the brilliant novelist and essayist, has repeated many times the important premise that the climate crisis is precisely a crisis of culture, right? The kind of capacity for us to imagine a world in which we live together, live collectively, is something we have to cultivate, is something we have to work together to produce. The narratives that will not only explain our present, but sort of give us and frankly our children the capacity to imagine things into the future, right? And just quickly back to the Venice Biennale, half of the people who see the Biennale are school children, right? Part of the reason it's open into November is that most of the Italian schools send kids through, and so we were really eager to produce an exhibition that would have that kind of visceral effect that would that at any age, right, could be appreciated. Yeah, David, you want to? I'm good. He's good. Okay.
Well, since David is not adding something to this, I can add something of the common Biennale project of 2021, the Archaeology of Disability, which we did then, of course, speaking to a higher audience and not communicating with the public, but then we brought it to Greece. We organized guided tours with sign language and then a workshop with kids to communicate. So there was a lot of public faces. So art can be a way of communicating with the wider public. And because we all have our academic hat and we have our discussions because we need to have them, we need at the same time stand down of the pedestal and communicate in other ways, public facing, games with kids, and and so on. So I think this is something that is essential in the discussion.
Absolutely, thank you. And storytelling is such an important part, I think, of the role of arts and culture in tackling some of the challenges facing forward. We're going to wrap it up. I like that we've officially kicked off the Delos Declaration with I've got make yourself uncomfortable and stop cleaning as the top two commitments.
Make babies.
Yeah, and make babies. Great. Thank you so much to the incredible panel, and thank you so much, of course, to the World Human Forum for pulling this together. We look forward to the conversations continuing and moving into space after us. Thank you.